All right, good evening, everyone. It is November 14th at 6:30, and this is a WestCat meeting. So if we could have roll call, please.
Tom Hansen,
Here?
Tiffany Grimsley,
Here.
Dion Bailey,
Here.
Cameron Sasai,
Here.
Maureen Toms is absent excused, Jerry Parsons is absent, Heidi Swillinger is absent excused.
All right, so we do the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So shall we approve the agenda?
Motion to approve. Second.
All right, we have a motion, and a second. All those in favor?
Yes.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. Public communications, do we have any public communications?
We do not.
All right, consent calendar, we have, was it 3 items? 5 items. Is anybody interested in the consent calendar?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the consent calendar as is.
Second?
All right, we have a motion and a second on the consent calendar. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone like to abstain? No? All right. 2.0, items for board action discussion, presentation and overview of WestCat Comprehensive Operations Analyst, WestCat Evolution by Ronnie Kraft. I believe she's right here with us right now. Mr. General Manager, we'd like to do a little.
Sure. So, as you say, this is Ronnie Kraft. She's taking care of our comprehensive operations analysis that the board approved. So we've done some initial work, which she's going to share with you today, and then kind of an overview of what we're looking to get out of the project. We are looking for some feedback from you today, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities to comment, ask questions, and clarify on ways forward. There's a couple of questions on what some of our goals will be, some of our priorities will be. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ronnie, and give me a second to start.
All right, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm Ronnie Kraft. I'm a transportation planning consultant. I've been doing this for a little more than 18 years. And worked all over the Bay Area, and specifically projects related to this are short-range transit plans, but also long-range transit plans. I've done a lot of market research, specifically onboard surveys, and I'm really excited to be working on this. It's a great opportunity for a planner. So for this board meeting, one more. As Rob said, we're going to go over the study goals and would really like your input on all of these. What we've discovered thus far for the existing conditions, and then also what comes next in terms of the public engagement. And so if you have questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt me. That's welcome. So first I'm going to go over very briefly over the study. I understand you've heard about it before. We're going to look at the goals and then some potential goals and see where your thoughts lie. I'm going to go through the existing conditions findings, which you had in the report, so I'll just touch on the highlights, and then introduce you to the public engagement activities, of which there are many, but we'll focus in on the onboard survey, because I have some questions for you that'll be interesting. So this is the WestCat service area. It's defined as these 8 census designated places, or CDPs. So I'm very excited to be taking a fresh look at the system. And the best part of this is finding out actually what the community needs. Having the opportunity to go out and request that information and get feedback in a very comprehensive way it's wonderful for a transit agency. And we're going to do some data analysis beyond what we've already done in terms of what's on the ground, do some really in-depth data analysis. And, there's a lot of agencies that, starting pre-pandemic have started doing redesigns, and it's largely proven successful. So there's a lot of case studies and best practices to pull from. This is the project timeline. Right now, we're at that first line, the board meeting. We have already started the public engagement, and soon we'll be jumping into the service assessments and opportunities in parallel. This is looking to have you a draft next year in July. That'll be the main and last board meeting, and then we'll finalize the plan. In between then, we'll be doing in-depth financial analysis and service improvement scenarios and a marketing plan. Okay. So we started from a large list and decided on some key goals. So when I'm talking about goals, what I'm talking about is goals not just for this study, but for WestCat in general for service delivery. And so wanted to focus on effectiveness, reliability, community awareness, and customer satisfaction as the core and the must do those things. What we'd really like your input on is consideration of coverage. So coverage can mean 2 or 3 different things, but basically it can be geographic coverage. So make sure that you're covering a wide area. It can be, span of service. So weekends, nights, the time that it's allowed. And also it can mean that, you're looking at underserved populations. And so you're covering populations that, one, are more likely to use and need transit. And so that is a consideration. I'll talk about this towards the end, but there's always trade-offs and priorities to service delivery. And so the other side of coverage is can be looked at as ridership. If you have less coverage and you focus more resources towards where there's higher demand, then you do get higher ridership. So it's a balancing act with those. Connectivity. WestCat is in this amazing central location with so many bus and transit options and rail options that I'll go into. And accessibility and equity. And this is already inherent in what WestCat does, so that's why it's for consideration, because it's sort of a given. But if you feel like it should be called out, then we can do that. So first question, any thoughts on these?
I think these are great. For consideration, the accessibility and equity, that's always a high priority for me and a concern. And how are we assessing, or what is the data telling us regarding individuals who need more time for onboarding and offboarding, and then what does that look like in terms of service delivery? Those
Okay.
would be my questions around that.
Yeah, that's a good question. We might be finding that out from the onboard survey, and also you can look at dwell times and whether there was a wheelchair or a ramp lowered. So can try to get at that.
I think for me, one of the interesting would be connectivity, because with the plight of BART right now, we used to be looking at one agency where we moved a lot of people towards that direction, and also to San Francisco. Is that where we're at now, will that continue, or does the BART model still work where we have to be ready to take all those riders back to BART, or is the BART going to stay at the same level it's at. It's going to be interesting with connectivity how important it'll be in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a pretty important thing right now. And there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, we think about how many people we move compared to what we did before the pandemic. It's like two different worlds right now.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. Thank you for your input. So now into the existing conditions. I'm gonna go over transit service and then some demographics and socioeconomics of the service area, and then also the commute patterns that we have access to. So first up, this is the system as a whole, which includes dial-a-ride. And, no surprises here. But it's, in 2022, fiscal year 2022, ridership, steeply rose. And so service was put back in, and again in the next year. But recently, in the last fiscal year, it, barely rose. And some of the routes didn't increase at all. So something that we need to be very aware of. Next. So these are the fixed routes. Green are local, maroon is links, and then blue is regional express. So on the next slide. This is an infographic showing the span of service and also the headways, how frequently the bus comes. And, it's pretty good. And you can see that links, is the one that comes the most often. And there's one route that is commute times only. And then, most of the local routes are about 40 to 60 plus minutes. That's how often they come right now. And so when looking at all of the fixed routes, this chart is broken up into separating them, and I'm going to separate them for the study and throughout this presentation. The local routes, the express routes, and Transbay. And you can see that the express routes, which are in green, have the largest proportion of ridership of all, and also of service hours. So just in case, so service hours is time when the bus is able to actively pick up and drop off passengers. That's it. It's a good measure, especially for figuring out productivity, but also costs. And then on the right, this is the passengers per service hour for all of the fixed routes, not including dial-a-ride. And again, it follows the same sort of pattern as ridership, where it just barely increased in last year. So first onto the local fixed routes. There are 8. On weekdays, they run about every 30 to one route runs over 60 minutes headways. The 11 and 19 run on Saturdays. And 2 of these local routes actually go beyond the service area boundary, and one to Martinez and one to the college. This is a performance of the local fixed routes. All 8 are over there on the right, and you can see that C3 has the highest. 19 is at the lowest, but it's only one day a week, so it's hard to see that. What I thought was interesting was the 10 and the 12 are very, very similar, and half of the route geographically is the same. And then 16 is doing well up there. On the left are passengers per revenue hour. And so for the local routes, and this is between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24, all of them except for 19 did increase, which is great. And, average is somewhere around between 6 and 8 passengers per hour, which could be better. So the regional express routes are shown here, and they all go to BART, and this. For this study and in general, we're treating the JR and the JL as one route, the J. And the J is the only route that operates on Sundays. It's also quite frequent. And the JPX has about 40-minute headways. It does operate all day, and it's about a 25-minute trip from Hercules Transit Center to BART. The JX is commute times only, less stops, about 40-minute headways, and it can make the trip in 16 minutes on average. So in terms of performance, the J has the highest ridership in the system, meaning the JL and JR combined. And the JPX has the second highest passengers per hour, you can see over there. But it did fall between the last 2 years, from 12.5 to 10.6, which is a bigger drop than most of the other routes. Well, the other routes grew, but it's a pretty big change, so I think that merits looking further into. Last is Lynx Transbay service. So this runs all the weekdays from 5 a.m. It's pretty early to 9 p.m. Often, relatively 20, 30-minute headways during peak times, and depending, of course, on traffic, can take 40 to 55 minutes to make the trip. So Lynx has the second highest total ridership in the system. And as you can see, it fluctuates by the month and with the season, just like all of the routes pretty much do. But because the ridership is so high, it has much more of an impact, a stronger impact on ridership. It has the highest number of passengers per hour, so the productivity, passengers per service hour, is the highest. Okay. And then dial ride, switching gears. Does anyone have any questions about the fixed routes? Okay. So dial ride, WestCat is special in that it offers, in addition to ADA paratransit, this senior dial ride open to anyone over the age of 65. It's also, special in that, the ADA service goes well and above what the requirements are of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the productivity and the cost per passenger trip are some of the lowest I've seen, especially in the Bay Area. So this, dial-a-ride's doing well. And so what I was also looking at is, these trips are given basically in the same vehicles and everything. Senior dial-a-ride does have lower priority than ADA trips, but it is available Monday through Saturday. But about 7% of all dial-a-ride trips are on the senior dial-a-ride. So, 92.7 are on ADA paratransit. The passengers per hour is around 2, which is pretty normal. That's usually a goal for dial-a-ride systems. And surprisingly to me, the ridership also follows sort of the monthly fluctuations pretty well. Because I think about, usually it's, well, I just want to look into that more. And then, among ADA paratransit, 77% are local, but 10.7 are regional, and that's important, and that's helped along by the one-seat program and the availability of regional trips on ADA with neighboring systems. All right. Speaking of neighboring systems, when I started compiling these, I just kept going. As you're aware, you're surrounded by different local bus systems and also rail. I mean, you could technically get from Pinole to Seattle or Chicago without having to walk between stations. because, going to Martinez and the Amtrak. And then also Capital Corridor, that's an important, as we'll see later, actually commute destination, and San Joaquin to get to Fresno. So that is the last before I move into the demographics and socioeconomics. Okay. So moving over to that, I used census data and primarily used American Community Survey 5-year estimates, which means it's estimated based on years 2018 through 2022. It's the most recent available. And except for in the maps, for the most part, what I did is I looked at the data for each individual community, all 8 of them. And there's a big table in the report that you can look at, but of note are that obviously Hercules and Pinole have the largest resident populations, and together they account for 66% of the service area population. Montalvan, is that how you say it? Montalvan Manor? Okay, thanks. Has the largest share of school-age children, which mean like 5 to 17 years old, with 20% of its community being school-age. It's interesting. The lowest is Bayview with only 8%. The proportions of Black, Indigenous, and people of color between communities ranges pretty widely from 86 to 12%. Hercules and Montalvan Manor have the lowest proportions of people who identify as white alone, with 17% and 14%. Then Crockett has the lowest percentage of residents who don't speak English very well, is how it's reported. And Montalvan Manor has the highest, 44% of residents there report not speaking English very well. Rodeo and Crockett have among the highest percentage of renter households, with 42% and 44%. And the average of renter households for the service area is 28%. So it's pretty low. And then, there's Port Costa, which is an outlier in many, many respects, geographically, size, the resident population is 251. There are 0 residents under the age of 25. 88% white alone. 7% speaking a language other than English at home. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. So, we're gonna speak. Oh, backwards. So moving on, I'm gonna talk about the populations and the key market sectors that are more likely to rely on transit, but also just to use it, whether or not it's a need ride. There's a way of looking at this historically is that, they're captive ridership because they don't have any choice. But that's actually not how we should be looking at this. It's not a fruitful way of looking at it, because it kind of then follows that you can do whatever you want to ridership in to service in high need areas, and you'll still have people riding it. But really, there's always a choice, and especially recently with all of these different mobility solutions coming up. And so I will look at older adults, school-aged youth, and people with disabilities, and people that are living in poverty, one by one. So first, we have a couple maps. First, showing the older adult population. And you can see where there's concentrations. The smallest geographic level that was available for this kind of data is the census block group. So not as fine as it could be, but it's still helpful to see where these populations are going. And the WestCat routes are in blue, so you can see that the area is pretty well covered. And then for school-aged youth, the distribution is slightly different. along, main San Pablo corridor and in Hercules. And so this will help when we're, looking at things down the road as to maybe moving things around. Knowing where these populations live is really important. And so for older adults, as baby boom generation is aging, it's a growing population sector. This is the first generation to age that grew up with the car, not riding transit. The service area in particular has a pretty high proportion of older adults at 19%, compared to Contra Costa County has 16% and California has 15%. There were not enough people with disabilities to map meaningfully, but here you can see that 12% of the population has a disability, or at least one, and that's pretty average compared to the county in California. This shows the number of people with disabilities per age group and per place or community. And, older adults are much, much more likely to have a disability, which also might explain why, there's such higher ridership on ADA paratransit versus only the senior dial ride. Okay. And then on to people living in poverty. So the Bay Area, for planning purposes, but also for determining eligibility for certain social programs, uses 200% of the federal poverty level. And the federal poverty level is dependent upon the number of people living in the household. So that's why there's not just one number up there. And so the Bay Area, due to the cost of living, uses 200% for most of its stuff. And so this is showing the count of people on the bar chart of the people living in poverty in the area. And, the distribution is kind of all over the place, which is interesting. It seems like there's pockets in all of the communities. Okay. So one more thing is, normally, well, not normally, but usually another strong determinant of use of transit is zero vehicle households. One, there were just not even nearly enough to in the service area to analyze without there being a huge margin of error. And two, I'll bring this up next. I'll bring it up now. In terms of commute data, none of the zero vehicle households used transit in the service area. So, of course, there is going to be a margin of error on there, but it was actually households with 3 or more licensed drivers that were much more likely to use transit to get to work. So, on to commute travel. I'll preface this by saying that this is entirely based on workers age 16 and over, so it's a smaller subset of the population. And it's only regarding commute to work. But commute to work could be for part-time, second jobs. Those are included. So for the service area as a whole, over the 5-year average, which I realize is problematic right now, 67.7% drove alone, and 7.5% used public transportation. And 12% worked from home, which is pretty high when compared to other areas and even in the past. So, obviously I wanted to look finer at this, are they accounting for recent changes? What's going on? Or is it just a straight average between those 5 years? Well, the data isn't available at the year level for individual communities, definitely not for block groups, but it is available at the county level. So this chart shows year by year. In green, the people that took public transit starting in 2018, and then in blue, the people that worked from home, or the proportion. And you can see prior to the pandemic, more people took public transit than worked at home. there was no data available at all for 2020. And then, well, understandably so. And then in 2021, massive shift, you know. And so you can see that over the last 3 years, the proportion of people working from home is decreasing, and the people using public transit to get to work is increasing. And again, this is for the county as a whole, but it's helpful for us for looking at the service area. Okay. So these are job locations symbolized by size within the service area. So these are workers, not residents. Some might be residents, but a very few proportion actually are. And so bigger the dot, the more there are. And, you know, Port Costa obviously has a tiny bit, but the majority of the service area is pretty spread out in terms of where job locations are. So this will be helpful when looking at route changes, new routes, or adjustments to see, you know, what proportion of these jobs are going to be proximate to transit line. And so one of the great things that we have in terms of data is the longitudinal employer household dynamic survey, which is part of the census. And they look at very specifically where to and where from people are coming from. So I was able to look at the service area both as where people are coming to for work, but also where people that live here are going. And so this shows you the distance and the direction of where people are coming from to work in the service area. And you can see that if they're coming from home, the pink one on the far right is that, you know, the most common places that people live that work in the service area are pretty close by. Richmond, Hercules, Vallejo, and Pinole. Next one. Same chart. This is for residents of the service area. And so this is showing that, you know, for residents where they're working, the highest locations are San Francisco, Oakland, Richmond, and Berkeley. And you can see the distance and direction is pretty, the majority are going south-southwest, so that holds up. And for residents, this table shows that, you know, almost 50% have a commute of longer than 10 to 24 miles, and 12% have more than 50-mile commute. That's pretty significant. And that up in the right-hand corner says, this is surprising to me and also very helpful to know, 93% of residents that work, that live in the service area, have jobs that are outside of the service area. Yeah, that's a lot. So this map shows where residents of the service area, roughly in that black rectangle, where they are going to for work. It actually goes beyond this, but I had to cut the map off somewhere. And so this is really interesting, and it's spread far and wide, you know, all the way up into Marin and Sonoma counties. And Santa Cruz. So again, this will be helpful for determining, you know, where people are needing to go. And, you know, we already knew that the regional and the express routes and links are well used, but, you know, this not only shows why, it also shows opportunity. Okay, so that is the last of demographics, commute, socioeconomics. Any questions? Yes. Jen?
Thank you. I had a question. This ties back into, I think, your first time you paused for questions.
Okay.
I was waiting for us to get to that last slide. So you, I think your initial question was if we had any questions on one of your first things that we're talking about here. It was like your first slide.
System-wide
It was,
performance?
no, it was right after goals. I'm sorry, it was key goals. Thank you, Tiffany.
Mm-hmm.
Key goals, and it was definitely, and then to consider. we talked about coverage area, and then we had this map here, and what we don't, I'm not sure if will be discussed in this as we go forward, but what we don't do is get our residents to, I think I heard you talk about all different places that we work. Many people working outside the coverage area. We don't have a tie-in to get folks to a ferry. And my question is will we be reaching out to our customers to ask them if we got them to a ferry, whether it be, I think the nearest places are Richmond and Vallejo, would that be a route that might be of importance? Because I think you also told us that the heavily used routes are the express route to the BART station and the link service. So people are using it to get to and from work, it sounds like mostly. We know that by looking at the buses in the middle of the day.
Right.
But I was wondering if you could talk about if this study would look at that.
Specifically ferry?
To a ferry station, not necessarily
Right.
a ferry, but if it could.
So you're not talking about planned ferry, but existing ferry?
Correct, yes.
Service. Well, we do definitely ask if they are connecting, like passengers, if they're connecting with other modes. Because, to the connectivity goal, it's a big part of this, is figuring out, when they're using other transit systems in conjunction for their trip, which, clearly they must be. And so that is covered. We also ask an open-ended question: where do you want the bus to go? Because we're looking at this with brand new eyes, and so we really want to hear from passengers. If that comes up, then they have the opportunity to tell us that.
Okay, I'm gonna just pause for a second and point it to our general manager. Would this be a place to address that, or is that some funding issue larger than this and we need not go there?
Well, no, I think this is the place to address it.
Okay.
I mean, we may end up with we can't do it because of funding, but having the idea on the table, having the idea as part of this plan, and having that as a goal of the board is the starting point to make that happen for sure.
Okay, thank you. I like him. Thank you.
Thank you. Going back a lot, actually. It's one of the things that stuck out to me was the decline in ridership with the Lynx Transbay service from last fiscal year to this fiscal year. And the mentioned correlation between ridership and was it the consistency of arrival times for that service? And I wanted to know what you make of that, initial thoughts, any initial policy recommendations to mitigate that?
I definitely noticed that as well, and I think it's gonna take some deep diving in. Not only we're gonna need to hear from passengers about that, and we're very much targeting Lynx passengers with the survey. I'm gonna go out there and be trying to get people to fill it out, but the strength of the correlation is yet to be determined, but it's it is there to see.
But it's significant enough to be.
Well, I mean, the data each on its own is significant. So
I'm wondering how much of that just has to do with folks. I mean, just the way that jobs have transformed in the past few years with
right.
folks working from home. I know, like in my own household, I have two members of my family who work in San Francisco, and post-pandemic, one of them is working 4 days in San Francisco, 1 day from home. The other is working 4 days from home and 1 day in the office in San Francisco. So I think that might be the case for a lot of
yeah, I mean,
folks in the past
everything's
year.
changed so rapidly and is still changing over the last 3 years. That including traffic. Traffic impacts links, and the regional routes, and that's been changing. There's constantly articles about how it's going up, and so that's why I wanted to bring that into consideration for that analysis.
Got it. And the last question I have is the slide for the modes of transportation that folks use in our service area. What is the source of the data? Was that tied to
census.
census data? Or?
Yeah, it's the census. They ask
Oh, wow.
about that.
Okay.
The American Community Survey.
Gotcha.
And we also, will be asking questions like that of the general public. We're also doing outreach to non-riders.
Gotcha. Excited to learn more about the public engagement process.
It's coming up.
Sure.
Thank you, Ronnie. This is a great presentation. One of the questions I'm sure that you will ask or you will cover in the data is the why question. You know, for the volume of people who live in the service area who choose not to take who are not part of our ridership, why are they choosing? And then the after or the B part of that would be, is there any way for us to mitigate those or meet those needs that are being expressed through whatever those reasons are for riders? And then harkening back to Director Sasai's question is about hybrid working. In the change in our schedules, as you were saying, there's been a lot of change in the past couple of years due to the pandemic's impact on the way we work and the number of people who work from home at least part of the time. And so perhaps there are incentives that we could explore to incentivize ridership for those sort of part-time workers who are going in on 1 or 2 or 3 days a week.
Right, where a monthly pass might not be the most, make the most sense. Well, so I didn't bring it up, but you probably know that WestCat's fares are very, very low compared to all of the Bay Area and beyond. Some of the lowest fares I've seen anywhere. So, yeah, we're not concerning ourselves too much with how passengers feel about the fares. Okay, that's it. All right. So, public engagement, we're doing quite a bit. This is, as I've said, a wonderful opportunity to go out and find out all the things that we wonder about the rest of the time. And so, right now, we are currently doing an onboard survey. There are surveys on board the buses for people to fill out, and I'll talk more about that in a second. I'm going to do interviews with dial-a-ride passengers. That's usually a more effective way to get information. Just short, 15 minutes or less. Call people up and have a set questions to find out, how that service is going, because dial-a-ride is a part of this study. Again, as I mentioned, non-rider input. This one is going to be a challenge. What do non-riders care about WestCat very much? Well, we're going to have an online survey available, because that's, other than handing them to people outside grocery stores, that's how you're going to get the input. But this is also where we need your help about getting the word out. We'll have a website very soon, and we'll do our best to get the information out there. But it's going to take having community groups and community-based organizations pushing this to really get some meaningful information from non-riders. And then also, I've already gone to 2, and there'll be more. A way to speak to non-riders is to go to events, specifically ones that are held by community-based organizations for some of these target populations, or just, commuters or anything like that, and, use the fact that they're already gathering to talk to them and get some input. So that's happening. We're going to have 2 community workshops that will be sort of open house style as workshops, so that they can drop in, look at different displays and interactive stations, provide input in a variety of ways, whether it's putting something on a map, having a chat, writing something down, and also just to get some information about the project and ways that they can, stay involved. And those, they're tough to get people to, but again, if we could get your help with that. We're going to have 1 in Panola, 1 in Hercules. And we're going to get input from drivers, speaking at 3 of their large meetings. They're all on the same day, to get to all of them. And those will be, shorter a bit, but then also going to have focus groups with smaller groups of drivers to get, meaningful, detailed data that they often have, their, information. Next, continued, we'll have a website. We'll have a messaging service, so people can call in and leave a message. And technology that is today actually transcribes that, so that's great. And that's, simple. We're in the process of creating a list of community-based organizations, starting with other agencies that have already had to do this. And so that's coming together. It would be very helpful if you have anything that you could help us add to this list, because, speaking through, trusted neighborhood people is how really, this, to get the word out and to get information back. And then I will be looking at, the customer comments that come in through cell phone and website, because that's all recorded, and so I can see where there are some themes there. So those are all of them. So on to the onboard survey that's happening now, started on Saturday. The blank surveys are front and back. It's kind of a lot of questions, but we had a lot to ask. And so, there's questions about what passengers need, how they currently travel, how they would rate current services. Very important is that they're looking at how they would rate potential improvements. And so there's a list from there. We're not just asking open-ended questions. And then also we're going to ask about priorities, which you will see in just a second. And it's going to be very helpful to know. It is available in Spanish, printed, and then there's language services that if someone does request over the phone, we can pretty much do any language. There's a gift card for $500 as the raffle if they want to provide their email for completing it. And we'll be passing out through drivers and also myself passing them out at transit centers. So while they're waiting or getting off the bus, and they're able to turn it into any driver. So it's great. And so we're gonna go have this out and available until Thanksgiving, when we'll announce the winner. And hopefully that person will want to be on our social media. And so, okay, this is very, very important for service planning. And these are not all of the trade-offs, but when you're talking about service delivery, it's important to look at these and get people's opinions. And for this, I'd like your opinion. So I'll go over them first, and then I'll show you the questions that we are specifically asking in the survey. So as I talked about, there's geographic coverage versus ridership. I already went over that. There's span of service, so a type of coverage, meaning, the number of hours in a day and the days of the week. Also, versus ridership. You can focus, energy on certain times when there's peak ridership. Local versus regional. The WestCat does both right now. Flexibility. So whether you can have demand response services or microtransit, or versus predictability, knowing when the bus is coming and where it's coming to at what time. So first one, this is one of the questions. And so would you prefer a bus that comes every 15 minutes, but the stop is half a mile away, or a bus that runs every 30 minutes, but the stop is quarter mile away? I gave it to you. Seriously.
I will say frequency is important for transportation.
You don't have to have an opinion, but this is what we are asking of ourselves and of our passengers.
Yeah, I tend to think that frequency is important. And the difference isn't that far, really. It's a couple blocks, right? So half a mile is 2.5 blocks, and a quarter mile.
If you're able-bodied, yeah.
If you're able-bodied, exactly. But we have, because we're very good, we have dial-a-ride, which is very inexpensive. And that's my answer.
It's true. Okay.
I think the right answer is both are important. But I live in the Pinole Shores district. This is West Pinole, a more industrial area. And just the input I've gotten from my neighbors is, yeah, it's a bit far. It's a bit far for them, far of a walk, especially for folks who might have disabilities as well. I think the nearest WestCat stop is on San Pablo Avenue, next to Sugar City. I think you all know where that is. So folks kind of find it difficult to do that, to the point where they would much rather just, unfortunately, drive to El Cerrito del Norte BART. So like I said, both are important. It just depends on who you ask in the community.
And it's going to be different everywhere. One of the things that is key about going through all of these factors, including the demographics, is that demand for ridership is based on entirely local factors. It's different in every community. This is why we have to ask these questions over and over again. Okay.
I guess I'd probably say frequency, but I live out in Crocker, so it's unique because there's not an option for farther because there's not much real estate out there to run a bus on. So it's down San Pablo, turn around and head back. So frequency would be more important at that end because we're at the end of the line and you can't run a grid pattern out there.
This wasn't a question, but I wondered if we had some sort of a hybrid dial-a-ride system. So dial-a-ride, I think, largely is for certain passengers, but if there was some hybrid that would mix the two to reduce the need for frequency, but also they pick you up closer to home at, when it's needed.
There are a few versions of that and systems that do that as a complement to fixed route service. That's one of the things we'll be looking at.
Thanks.
All right, now on to a couple different scenarios for regional versus local. So, would you prefer additional service to regional destinations like BART, San Francisco, and also Oakland, Berkeley, which is not current service, or more service to destinations within the service area?
Maybe just give a little bit more context on this one, because I want to use your answer honestly, but to your point earlier, Dion, about a lot of it does come down to funding. This particular question, a lot of our funding ties to specific types of service, so I think I probably shouldn't have said this before you answered, but I just think it's a really important when we think about this question that we can't just throw all of our money into service to BART or local service. There's other funding constraints that come along with kind of this question.
Understood, and I appreciate that. But we just got a grant the first time out because of our new general manager, so I have confidence. But do you want us to answer this question as well?
Oh, yes, please, all of these.
I have a question, I guess I'll start with, if that's okay. Do we know that our folks want to go to Oakland, Berkeley, or do we just see it as a concept, Oakland, Berkeley?
So there was a couple studies done pre-pandemic that pointed to yes. And there's a study currently being done by MTC that we will be getting information from that will hopefully tell us what's happening now in relation to this. But then also you can see the commute patterns for people that are going to work, and there's a lot of people going to work in Oakland and Berkeley. So.
And there's been multiple studies on that from our service area.
Right.
It's just something we have yet to service.
Yeah. I mean, it's pre-pandemic.
I heard it discussed, and I'm sorry, I mean to skip to the chair, but I'd heard it discussed. I should know if we actually had the data. It might precede my time on the board, but it sounds like we do have that. So
in the back of the report, yeah, but right before pandemic, in the back of the report, there's an overview, a summary of a couple of the studies, express bus study and the high capacity study.
I'll answer. For me, I think destinations such as Berkeley and Oakland and Emeryville versus additional service within our existing service area is probably something that I would be advocating for. And I think I have in the past and still. So one of the areas that I think, obviously you see Berkeley, Oakland, Emeryville as job destinations, as well as education systems, and as well as Contra Costa, Diablo Valley College. There is an access to that, but there's not really a direct connect currently. without having to transfer. And I think that that also limits us when we have transfers and within systems.
Okay, thank you. Got that down.
My answer is not definitive. I think if we do that, then we stop being a local bus and we start just taking folks to and from work, which means that we reduce some service. So I think it's got to be a combination. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere. Maybe we reduce some. The word is "or" is what I struggle with.
Because you know, it's going to be a combination, but you know, where is that line?
We have these so just as a talking point, we have these competing things where cities are building higher density housing, which means we probably shouldn't have the cars. But if the buses are all just taking folks to and from work, then how do you get around town without that's my challenge, because we have these huge projects that are being approved,
Right.
that have almost no parking. So anyway, you asked the question, yes or no. I think it's important that we get folks to work, because I think that helps get cars off the road. So I would go with the
Okay.
San Francisco, Oakland, et cetera.
Yeah.
And
I would agree with regional also, because all those number of people that are leaving, how many people work outside our area is pretty huge.
97%. Yeah.
And if you go back to one of the merger studies when was that one? Probably 15, 20 years ago they did that one merger study, and even then it showed people were going, there's a huge pattern from this area into Berkeley and Oakland going back that far. So Charlie was working on how do we do all the things we want to do and do that too, and we just could never put it together.
And before we move to another slide, but I want to make sure everybody has spoke on the.
No, I think to your point, it comes back to the slide about where folks are working and what's the most concentrated areas. I think you mentioned Mill Valley, or not Mill Valley, Marin County being one, San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland. So based off that, lean towards regional. On top of that, I'm thinking about, it'll be just great to have a WestCat service going to Shell Mound in Emeryville, the shopping center there, these different places where we all live and eat and consume. And I think that would be something beneficial. But again, right, these competing priorities. One or the other, like you said, happy medium would be.
Yeah. And, you know, there's various ways of looking at regional service and various ways to improve it, too. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to, go all the way to a destination as long as there's a well-timed and frequent connection.
If we had a line to downtown Berkeley, like a direct line, I would be taking that.
Yeah.
You know? I'm there often, and usually take LSU Del Norte, right, line to going through North Berkeley and downtown, and yeah.
From your house, right in
Yeah,
front, to
yeah, that'd be great.
okay,
Oh my goodness.
get on that. And then, basically the same question. This is also asked of the passengers, just in case, San Francisco, Bar, Oakland, Berkeley didn't resonate with them. This second one sort of gets at other destinations. And next slide, please. So these are two separate trade-offs that we have to look at, and that's frequent service during peak times, or a little bit less frequent, but spread out more evenly all over the day. So this is something that we want to know, because WestCat currently has a mix of peak service when it's busy, and then also all-day service. And so if there are people that are needing transit later at the night, we want to know that. And there's some questions in the survey about that too, or on weekends. Do you have any thoughts, any preference?
The majority of folks are using the services for employment, and so having those, being able to count on the every 15-minute peak commute time is really important. But I'm also a parent who's taken public transportation to San Francisco when my child was young, and 20 minutes seems like a long time when you've got a toddler with you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's true.
I just wanted to say, like, and going before another slide or something or another question, and I'm glad that you're asking these and that you, before these slides, about how you're asking passengers, and I know that there's maybe going to be some outreach in the future at different events, be it Pinole, Hercules, Rodeo, Crockett, wherever it may be. One of the things that I always come up against with people from the community is, especially when the Safeway was moved to Hercules, which I actually thought was brilliant. A lot of people didn't, and I had to tell them, I said, well, how are the people going to get there? I'm like, well, you have WestCat, there's Dial-A-Ride. If they're a senior, they can call 724-RIDE, they can get set up, and it'll be okay. They'll be able to get to Hercules and get to this Safeway, the new Safeway. And now we have a new market coming, which is great. Besides that, I think it would be amazing that on these big events, it would be nice to have one of our buses, maybe two of our buses, present, whether it's a car show in Pinole, whether it's the 4th of July festival in Hercules, or the cultural festival in Hercules, whatever, a car show in Rodeo, whatever it may be, where maybe you guys have a booth, but if at all possible, maybe there's a couple of our buses that we're really proud of, and that, hey, we're here. Here's the routes. Here's, some information. And then being able to ask the questions that you're asking for the newer folks, that may have not ever gotten on the bus or didn't know that the bus was even there. I mean,
Yeah, those are great opportunities.
I would hope that we could start doing that in the near future, if at all possible.
It's just time and money, but other than that,
Well, I got to say that will put money in the pocket of the agency, because people that weren't riding it, you'll capture people that don't know about the system, and then you start being around, and then WestCat becomes a thing, and maybe there's some little cool swag, like, I don't know, back in the day, some little cat or something that's like a teddy bear or something, I don't know, just something to hand people, I don't know,
that's looking at strategies like that will be part of the marketing plan. So yeah, be diving into all of these different events and coming up with a list, and aim at so many per year or so many people or touch points. Thank you.
I think it's a great idea, right? I can just picture, I don't know what our mascot's name is. Do we have a name for the mascot? What was it? Wes. Oh man, that's fitting. It'd be great to just have like a little plush toy, give the kids, like, especially right. Our focus is a lot of it is students, right? And so I think all those different strategies, especially when we get those new hydrogen buses in, be great to show off at the Pinole Car Show.
Backpacks,
all those things, absolutely.
I would take one. So the last one is close to the end of the presentation, is on frequency versus span. So we already sort of talked about this, but it puts two that we hadn't put up against each other before. And so, adding the frequency for weekends during, when the J already runs, or having later service so that there's, late weekend service, as the other option. Like, this is a tough one.
This is one we've always kind of struggled with, because we can see those consistent people, not so much on the weekend, but there's hardly anybody riding, but it's almost the same amount every night. These people are relying on this service to get, but the frequency is so important to get people to actually want to use the service, because if you've got spread out frequency, I ran into myself when I was working in San Francisco, taking the bus all the way to Barton all the way in, that if I could get on the right BART train to get to the right bus, if I missed that bus, it was a half an hour wait for the next bus.
Oh, yeah.
So it was if your timing's off a little bit, when the headways are apart, now you're kind of decentivizing going. Yeah.
And multiple studies have shown that frequency, i.e. dependability, is one of the strongest drivers of transit demand, or of transit use. So, okay.
Question, how is transit agencies and or our agency, which I don't know the answer to this, so I'm asking, how are we coordinating with other transportation modes, be it, forget the name of it, but what do they call the rideshare programs and that kind of stuff? And I know like even Richmond has a few vehicles in a certain area that routes through a portion of Richmond, and there's like an app, and then you can get a ride, and it's, you know, it's very inexpensive as well. How do we coordinate with that? So if there is like this after 10 o'clock, if we're only having one rider, but we have a 40 passenger bus, maybe that doesn't make sense, but maybe it makes sense that there's something at the stop where they can press a button, maybe somebody answers the phone, and some other mode of transportation is able to get them safely to whatever the next bus stop is, or whatever, if it's after a certain hour. I don't know. Is there things like that?
Yeah, I've worked on looking at feasibility of studies like that in San Mateo County. You know, they started their flex service, but there's also, you know, unique partnerships that can be had with the rideshare companies to do, you know, last mile, or specifically, you know, since for most agencies the cost of providing an ADA trip is so expensive, if you can shift some of those to rideshare, it's actually less expensive to provide the ride, or subsidized rides on there. So yeah, we'll look into that.
Maybe just to add slightly to that, Jerry, because I think CCTA are doing some work right now in the integrated transit plan, plus some of the work that they're doing, they call it all the one-click, one-call call centre. But I think that kind of ties into it. So it's not necessarily us providing the service, but there's a service out there that could be used to find out what other options are out there. So I think they are being worked on, and we're part of those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
How effective is employers sponsoring, or like, can we reach out to employers, like big employers, and say like, if they have any programs where you guys take transit to work, you know, like how effective is that getting people to ride?
You know, I don't off the top of my head know how effective it is, but as employers, it's, you know, especially large employers, it's usually something that they do. Yeah, at least I know for the peninsula, but, you know, doing outreach to employers here would, you know, be interesting. It's usually larger employers, and there's not huge ones here, but there's, you know, BioRed. Yeah. But those are pretty common, you know, partnerships. Even if it's just a easier way to get people their passes, or have it subsidized by the company. All right, so last, I already spoke about most of this, but just again, community houses are going to be coming up the second week in December. And so on to the next slide, we'll have refreshments, but could you please help us, you know, with connecting with key stakeholders, and it doesn't have to be only, you know, groups that work with older adults, people with disabilities, basically anyone, any community group that gets out there in the community would be great and valuable. You know, one of the things I'll also be doing is just having conversations with key stakeholders. So maybe there isn't an event, maybe there isn't a group or mailing list, but I can talk to, say, the senior center director and say, okay, you know, what are you seeing? What do your constituents need? And then also getting the word out about the community open houses would be great. That's it. Schools, connections with schools would be very helpful.
Well, thanks for the presentation. Yeah, any way you can send us the link to the online survey to distribute if you would like that?
Oh, definitely will.
Right.
Yeah, it's not ready yet, but for sure.
For sure, and the
That'll be just a little bit later.
right, and the community open house as well. Would love to attend those. And then, who's the point person to connect you all with different community stakeholders and groups? Would it be General Manager Thompson? Or?
I think either myself or Mika on my staff. I think that's you know, that's the easiest way to kind of keep in touch and keep the conversation.
Like Director Parsons said, like different PTAs, especially high school PTAs. Those are all groups that we should be focusing on. And then, last question I have is back to what Director Grimsley had mentioned, which is like in these different surveys, online survey, the onboard survey, are there any questions to folks about what are the deterrents for folks to wanting to ride WestCat, whether it be like perceived safety or non-safety?
Yeah,
all those
so,
different things?
and under the service ratings, they have the opportunity to say, you know, oh, the availability of service at night is 1 out of 5, you know.
Got it.
And so to be able to say, and then also there are the open-ended questions, and we also ask, which usually has interesting results, is if you weren't taking, you know, WestCat, or one, we ask why they take WestCat and allow them multiple answers, but also if you weren't taking WestCat on this day, how else would you get around? And then we also ask, in a year from now, how do you see yourself getting around? Do you see riding WestCat about the same, or do you see driving more? Because a lot of people are, you know, in transition, and one of the, you know, strongest indicators of whether a person decides to change their transit use is a change in job or home location.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I got one more.
Okay.
As I know that our meetings are televised, I think it would be amazing if you had a 5-minute, 3-minute, I don't know what the city of Pinole and or the city of Hercules and or the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors meeting and or the local school districts, John Swett Unified and West Contra Costa Unified, but doing some type of presentation where you're at their meeting and then, you know, with whatever that comes up on their slides, and for the people that are watching their meetings on television and or in person, and being able to just maybe once a year, you know, plan it that you go to some meeting that WestCat is, you know, presented to those different organizations because they're televised as well.
Interesting.
I know when I sat on the school board, I would have welcomed that because WestCat, even though technically it's not a school bus, it had to stop right at the John Swett High School that serves both Kirkines Middle School and John Swett. So it's fantastic for students that are coming from Rodeo and a portion of Hercules going to Crockett. So it's actually pretty awesome, and it gets well used on top of the regular school bus system that's provided.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Do you have anything?
Well, I'm just thinking, these are all great ideas that I'm hearing right now, and I'm thinking about the opposite end, like the destination cities. Would it be possible to do a presentation, for example, like a Cal Day? I work for UC Berkeley. For like WestCat does a Cal Day presentation or has a booth, because if there are folks living in Contra Costa County, which there are a lot of students, particularly grad students who, you know, move to Contra Costa County because it's a little bit less expensive than living in Berkeley proper, and use public transportation or may use public transportation, you know, if that greater awareness. So, I mean, I'll certainly push it on my own personal social media, but.
Yeah, if there's anything that comes up over the next few months that's, you know, part of this, I'd be happy to go somewhere. I've already gone with WestCat to a couple of events that were in San Francisco, actually, that were aimed at commuters and the different options for getting to and from work down there. All right.
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much. Great presentation. Look
Thank
forward to
you.
the next step.
Yep. See you in a few months.
Thank you.
Exciting.
Well, that brings us to the committee reports. General Manager's report.
I'm going to be brief tonight. I think there's only really 2 items I'm going to follow up on. There was a CCTA workshop a couple of weeks ago with the authority board, and a number of the transit agencies were in attendance. There was a lot of discussion. The second day, which was when mainly the transit operators were involved, was a lot of discussion about the integrated transit plan that the county, that CCTA are undergoing right now. So just a lot of background information, kind of next steps of how we're working together with the authority on potential options. There's a lot of work on transit priority corridors throughout the whole county. There's a lot of work on mobility hubs, to your point earlier, Director Parsons, about how down the road there could be these opportunities late at night for different rideshare vehicles, for different things to be present at BART stations, at Hercules Transit Centre, just kind of like more actual mobility hubs with different options there. So that's kind of an ongoing project. We continue to work on that. And then the other item is tomorrow morning, or actually all day tomorrow, our staff, County Connection staff and Tri-Delta staff have a meeting with MTC and their regional network management staff. I think the MTC staff reached out to the operators and said, could we come to one of your facilities and kind of spend the day and understand what transit operations are? I think it's a really unique, good first step by MTC to kind of recognise that they could probably really benefit from seeing how transit operations actually work. So we are planning, I say all day over at County Connection, number of presentations, going to get into kind of funding, operational needs, the difference of, you know, contracted service like we have and County Connection, how they do everything within their own kind of agency. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. You know, MTC are bringing, I think there's 14 staff, their staff are kind of invited to come and spend the day and hopefully get a better understanding of, you know, the greater concept of what transit is what they're responsible for kind of overseeing. So looking forward to that today, and we'll report back on that next month. That's all I have today.
Any questions to the report? No? All right, good. So that brings the CCT or WCT TAC report. That's me. Richmond Paratransit plan. They talked about that at the last meeting. About it's an update on what's going on with that planning. There, you know, it's got to do with safety and reducing traffic speed stuff. So that was a report on that one. And then we had a paratransit funding item come up for Measure J, allocating some funds, but unfortunately at the October 25th meeting, we did not have a quorum, so we had to meet again on November 1st to get that passed. And also at the October 25th meeting, we talked about the West Contra Costa Unified School District Low Bus Pass Program, low-income bus pass program. And some of the members of the board were not familiar with that, so the staff gave an update on how that worked and how people became available. So that's what happened. And Chris, can you think of anything else of importance that happened at the last? I guess the most exciting part is we had to meet twice to get Measure J done, but other than that, it was pretty simple. So that's all for WCTAC. Do we have any correspondence?
I have a question about the WCTAC.
Yes.
You mentioned about the low-income student bus program for AC Transit. Was there any discussion about our portion?
It was just a description about how it works.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't know about it, that it actually existed and how it works and how you get on it. And there was a lot of confusion about which bus pass worked with what group.
All right.
So they kind of just let the board know about how it worked.
All right, because that, if they need to know, that also benefits John Swett Unified School District as well. So that's why I bring that up.
Yeah, they kind of mentioned there was more than just West Contra Costa, but it was more about how the program worked than anything. All right, board communications or future items? All right, shall we go to adjournment then? So we'll see you again soon, probably on December 12th, on a Thursday. Let's briefly schedule that. All right. Everybody have a nice Thanksgiving.